Hello, everyone, and welcome to this UN Behavioral Science Week session, Expo session looking at practical examples in the area of resilience, maritime challenges, and creativity. My name is Mary McLennan. I am the Senior Advisor on Behavioral Science to the Executive Office of the Secretary General. I also lead an initiative called the UN Behavioral Science Group. So I'll just start off with a few slides to give us some context here. To the next slide, please. So Behavioral Science Week is taking place this week. We're bringing together 46 entities over the course of 5 days of events. Next slide, please. So over the week, we've had a lot of sessions on the topics of AI and data, also on evidence use. So there's lots to unpack if you want to check out the recordings. But we still have a few, we have one more day to go and a few more sessions. So we have one tomorrow looking at going local to global and global to local when it comes to applying behavioral science, and also another expo looking at practical examples and case studies as well. So encourage you to check those out. So the Behavioral Science Group, as I mentioned, is an initiative that I lead, and it brings together 7,000 members through in 70 UN entities in 150 countries. So there's lots of interest and demand across the UN. So the Behavioral Science Group is convening and hosting Behavioral Science Week this year, as well as the last number of years. You're welcome to join the Behavioral Science Group if you're in the UN. Obviously, this is an initiative primarily for you. But if you're outside the UN and you'd like to join us as well, you can do so as an observer and get invited to our events, hear about what's happening across the UN as well. That'd be great. So to situate ourselves in the bigger picture here, why are we talking about behavioral science? So there's lots of reasons we've unpacked throughout the week about being more efficient and effective and being more innovative in the work that we do. And we can talk about that. But one of the bigger reasons is because behavioral science is part of this UN 2.0 quintet of change. So these are 5 areas the Secretary General has deemed important for the UN to be nimble and effective and really deliver on its ambitious agenda. So there are behavioral science, alongside data, digital transformation, innovation, and of course, strategic foresight. So lots there to unpack in terms of intersections across these areas, but also these are 5 areas in which the UN is progressing its work. Next slide, please. So check out in the chat, we have a number of resources, including the Secretary General's guidance note on behavioral science, as well as the UN Behavioral Science Review. And also check out the link to join the group as well if you haven't done so just yet. Okay, so for today's webinar, we please ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Then there you can also see the questions of your colleagues and upvote those that you may not have yourself, so we can have a meaningful discussion amongst us today. Okay, so on to our speakers for today. So we have a panel of 6 speakers looking at 3 different topics. So first, we'll hear about the topic of behavioral science and resilience from Rhea and UNDRR and Annabelle and Fal. Then we'll hear about behavioral science and maritime challenges from Momoko and the World Maritime University, and then Rizki Ashvina from UN Global Falls. And then finally, we'll hear about cultivating emotions and creativity for Future Ready UN with Lauren from UN Global Pulse again, as well as Edward from the Beyond Lab. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Elad Meshloom who's the head of the IMF Creative Lab, a digital innovation team in the International Monetary Fund. He'll be moderating today's discussion and take us from here. But for that, let's start with Rhea first, get her started, and then Elad will come in to moderate from here on out. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mary, for the introduction. So my name is Rhea from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and I want to give an introduction to why behavioral science application for DR and foresight and resilient investment is so important. So you may think that disaster risk reduction doesn't have that much to do with behavioral science, and up to 2022, the organization did very much focus on just data and just good risk information and evidence, scientific evidence. However, what we noticed was that there was not necessarily an action that would come after we would deliver the data. So there was some gap we wanted to address. And so what we found was that, as I said earlier, is that the action was not following. And the reason for this is that cognitive biases and core social motives shape a lot of the institutional and individual decisions about risk and how we do foresight, especially under high uncertainty or stress. So when people are in a situation of a disaster, most of the times, what we find is that they go, if we look at the graphic, on the non-conscious pathway, which is faster, low effort, and heuristics based. That means it's the shortcut in decision making and is usually not based on scientific evidence, because we base it a lot on what we already believe to be true or what our experience is. While the conscious, slower, effortful, and reasoned decision making that we ideally would like to have when we present risk information, which is kind of the more neutral one, usually works for prevention, risk prevention messaging, however, not in an active crisis. So what affects an active crisis are these core social motives. So that could be, for example, belonging to a certain community that I don't want to risk by going a different path, how we understand the world, and if we feel we have agency over something. While the cognitive biases could be something like myopia, that I only see the risk that is right in front of me, or I have optimism and I just think this cannot happen to me, so I don't have to prepare for this or that risk. So what is important, though, that if we want to build resilience, we have to manage risk. And risk management only works not only if people are aware of a potential risk, so if they have the data, but they also need to decide that they're concerned and that there's something they can do about it. And then they have to select a course of action and execute it. And in all these stages, biases and social motives can come in and break that decision pathway, which then leads to no action. So we really must incorporate behavioral science into risk assessment, into foresight and resilience building action, to get away from these blind spots on risk and have more basically realistic decisions on risk that are actually built on scientific data, rather than our own cognitive biases and beliefs of the world. So if we want to achieve resilience, however, we also need investment. And that's a big topic in 2025, because we're gearing up to the Financing for Development conference, the fourth one that happens in June. And resilience and risk reduction investment decisions are equally influenced by biases and emotions. So we're greatly underestimating the costs of disaster on people, environment, and our economy, which is the finding of a report that we will publish very soon. And with rising impacts of climate change and growing populations in unsafe areas, the costs will even rise further. So it's very important that we do invest in resilience. However, how do we overcome the barriers that are in the way of smart DRR investments and get to pathway of resilience? So if we look at this graphic, we can see there's the traditional approach to investment decisions and the behavioral one that actually factors in that there are a lot of emotions, especially when it comes about to financing and investment, where there's some voice in our head that tells us certain stories that may not necessarily be based on the reality, but that make us reluctant to do certain investments. And lastly, I just wanted to give you a little bit food for thought. If you would think, if you see this image, what future will you choose? So the Secretary General just reminded us in January that there's a lot of climate risk ahead, and if we don't build resilience, we will have more storms, more floods, more migration. There will be impact on many areas in our lives. So that would kind of be the left-hand side if we don't gear up our investment in sustainable development and in resilience building. Or do we want to go to this resilience pathway? So if that is on the right-hand side, where we keep the planet safe, we keep people safe, and we still achieve some level of prosperity. So let's start to think about what questions we should ask ourselves when we do this kind of work to understand how behavior can influence future pathways and these cognitive biases and these social motives. So we should always ask ourselves, what are the cognitive biases that could interfere with an action? So like this optimism, myopia, what are the core social motives? Belonging, maybe that I want to feel safe in the world, what is important to people, and what are limiting beliefs that prevent people from smart action. So that could be lack of time, lack of finances, lack of power. What else could be at the core? So we want to start to uncover these layers to understand better how people actually behave. And with that, I will finish and hand over to my colleague from FAO, who has a very interesting example and a tool how this can actually work to understand how communities act.
Thank you, Ria. And Annabelle from FAO, the floor is yours. So take us from that really interesting what to what and why when we talk about dry land landscapes.
Great, thanks a lot. So just give me a second to share my screen and please let me know if you see the correct version. I think it takes a second to...
We can see your slide.
Perfect, great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Annabelle from FAO's Plant Production and Protection Division. And today I'd like to share how we're integrating behavioral insights into development programs within FAO and into resilience assessments. So in other words, how we're working to better understand not just what farmers do, but also why they do it. And this work that I'm presenting today is part of the GEF7 Dryland Sustainable Landscapes Impact Program, which is quite long, so we tend to call it the DSLIP. And the DSLIP covers 11 countries in dryland regions, 6 of which are led by FAO. So you can see that here on the left-hand side on the map. And this is also where we've implemented the behavioral change assessment that I'm talking about today. And the DSLIP aims to restore degraded lands while also simultaneously strengthening livelihoods and building resilience across drylands. But long-term resilience doesn't come only through top-down solutions alone. And that's why the program puts strong emphasis also on evidence-based decision-making, which considers local realities. And in this context, the ELAM, or Integrated Landscape Assessment Methodology, was developed, which integrates data from different levels. So from the geospatial level down to the household level data. And the household level data is where the behavioral change assessment comes in. For the collection of household level data, we've used the SHARP Plus tool in the DSLIP. It's a household survey tool developed by FAO to assess the resilience of smallholder farmers. And it looks at farming systems, livelihood strategies, and vulnerability to climate and other shocks. So basically looking at the what is happening in the landscape and on the farm level. And then we've tailored the SHARP Plus to go deeper. So now we're not just capturing the what, but we're capturing the why behind farmers' decisions. And for this, we use the COM-B framework, which you can see here on the left-hand side, to better understand how farmers make decisions. So we're looking at capability, opportunity, and motivation to engage in specific sustainable practices. And for this, we've developed a behavioral change assessment that complements the SHARP Plus resilience survey and the questions that are already part of this survey. And it's primarily open-ended questions, carefully designed to align with the COM-B model. And although we do also include some predefined answer categories to facilitate the data collection and data analysis process, we do encourage the enumerators in the trainings to probe without leading. So in the surveys and the assessments with the farmers directly, just to encourage participants to reflect freely in their own words so that we can actually capture their motivators for engaging in specific practices. And the survey is hosted on Kobo Toolbox. Some of you may know it. This allows us to collect both qualitative insights and quantify them for analysis across contexts. So just again to reiterate, we're not only capturing the what, so this serves us for the adoption, to look into the adoption of practices for M&E purposes, but we're also looking at the why behind these choices, which then helps us not just for M&E, but also to tailor the project intervention itself. And in more practical terms, this means that by combining the behavioral change assessment with the resilience assessment SHARP Plus, we also reduce respondent fatigue. So instead of running separate surveys for M&E purpose and for aligning project interventions, we're streamlining the data collection, which helps us also to save budget costs, but also to build trust within communities and to move faster towards the actual implementation. And what's powerful about this integrated approach is that we can trace how factors like market access, risk perceptions, or community norms are actually interacting to shape the behavior of farmers, and really helps us to tailor the project intervention to the capacity needs on the ground and to ensure long-term application of the targeted behaviors. And here I've just included one example of how we visualize the data. So we have a really nice Excel dashboard, which is interactive. So you can interact with the data. We create also extensive reports of the findings where we interpret the findings and give recommendations. But here you can really interact with the data and also see visualizations. This is an example from an assessment we carried out in Namibia, looking at the cultivation of millet as a target behavior. And you can see here above the distribution of doers and non-doers of this practice. So those that are or are not cultivating millet. And then you see the beginning of the first module for doers, looking at the motivations to start planting millet that farmers mentioned. Here we see it's disaggregated by producer organizations, but you can also go in, you can disaggregate by gender or by different geographical units. So it really allows to look into the data from different angles and from whichever angle interests you most. And here I've also included one visualization example for the Sharp Plus part of the survey. You can see here, this is for resilience levels on the crop production module. There's a lot of different modules within Sharp Plus. And here we can see a spider graph depicting the different levels of resilience for this module per producer organization again. And then the dashboard generates key findings automatically based on the sub-indicators that are calculated from the data. So just as a brief example of how we also visualize this data and how you can interact with it. Then we have another tool. I'll be posting the links in the chat, but 5 minutes, it's just to give you like a brief input of what we're doing that helps us to feed the data into project implementation. It's a theory of change. It's called the visual narratives for agroecological transitions. And here, this helps us to visualize where we can start to move towards the sustainable transition that we're trying to work towards in the process of the program. I'll be posting the links in the chat, so you'll have more time to look into anything that interests you more in depth. And lastly, just to show how this all integrates within ELAM, here's an example of a map from Namibia depicting land productivity dynamics across the project area. And by overlaying this map with data from our behavioral change and resilience assessments, we can not only see where land degradation or recovery is happening, but also how farmers' behaviors and decisions are contributing to these patterns. So basically, integrating behavioral insights with geospatial data enables us to pinpoint which interventions will be most effective in which areas, and it allows us to see the full picture. So what's happening in the landscape, why it's happening, and where we can most effectively intervene. So in conclusion, sustainable land management, it's not just about transforming landscapes, it's about transforming behaviors. And by putting people at the center of our interventions and designing the project interventions with behavioral insights in mind, we're ensuring that we're having the greatest impact possible, and that also we're really looking into what farmers need. And that's it from my side. And if you're interested in anything, or if you have comments, questions, whatever, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I'll be posting additional information and material in the chat. And also next week, we have an e-learning series on this tool coming up on Monday. So if you're more interested to hear more in depth about this, you'll have the chance to check in there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Annabelle. So a couple of questions we have in the chat. One of them is in regards to the biggest consideration for behavioral science and resilience, and how does data play a role? And I think you gave us a really nice example there, but I don't know if you or Ria would like to expand on that. There was another request to provide link to the survey and to the tools used, which you said you will, which is fantastic. And another question in regards to private sector investment. So if you wanna, you and Ria wanna take these?
So I can just go ahead first, maybe. With regards to what are the biggest considerations for behavioral science and Resilia? How does data play a role? I'm not 100% sure if I understand where this question is going to. I'm going to answer. I hope I answer with what the person wants to know. So the biggest consideration here for behavioral science in the context of resilience and of the program is to see that we're not, so that we don't only have technically sound solutions and propositions. So we say, for example, millet, it's great, we're in drylands, and farmers want drought resilient crops and they want nutritious crops. And so why would they not adopt it? Why would they not cultivate it, you know? But then we're not taking into account that maybe there's some kind of traditions around millet, some beliefs that it's has some kind of impact, or maybe it's a crop that's only cultivated by specific groups, or there's some kind of gender dynamics in processing that we don't take into account that will lead to marginalization of women if we scale up this crop. So what we want is to make sure that we're covering all these aspects so that we don't go in and cause more damage, or just have farmers say like, wait, no, it's great that it's drought resilient, it's great that it's super nutritious, but actually this does not go well with my realities. I have different priorities. It doesn't combine well with the crops that I have. I don't know, I'm just coming up with examples. So these are the biggest considerations for the behavioral science in the context of resilience, to make sure we're addressing the needs of farmers and we're not just completely misallocating the resources of the project and the program. So I hope that answers the question. And maybe just for time purposes, I'll go into the last one that's also addressed to me, which says, it's from Duncan, on the membership of forest and farm producer organizations, if we can generally see that it improves the adoption of sustainable technologies or practices. And yes, we have definitely seen that farmers that are, and respondents that are organized in these producer organizations, so in FFPOs, as we call them, that they in tendency are more engaged in sustainable practices also, and especially also they have more access to markets and more engaged in maybe innovative ways of processing and selling their produce. That's it.
Thanks, Annabelle. And Ria, I don't know if you want to quickly
Yes.
take the question about private sector investment.
Very happy. I saw actually a question on smallholder. Is this what you mean? The first question? Smallholder farmers investment. I don't know the exact study, so I haven't read it yet, but thank you so much to share. But I think in general, what we should not see a resilience investment as something new. So we're not asking a lot of new resources that don't exist to invest in resilience, but actually think about risk and resilience as we invest. And a lot of these actions are actually sustainable development actions and tackle vulnerability and exposure rather than, for example, a disaster relief plan or fund or something like that. This is not necessarily what we mean, but we really want to, by reducing vulnerability, it's a win-win. It's anyway important because vulnerability could be due to poverty or due to lack of health access to health systems or educational systems, etc. So as we get into an area of more uncertainty, especially with climate change, it's very important that we tackle what we can, what we know. So we know a lot about these vulnerabilities, and they're very structural and very systemic, but we can manage those while the hazard is the element that we can't tackle so much. And just very quickly, there was also a question on data. Data should actually give us the basis for our decision making, because we know then a lot where the vulnerability is highest of people and assets and where I need to focus on. However, the behavioral part is really how to get people and institutions to act. So this is where we have to connect that with the data. And happy if anybody has more questions, they can reach out.
Thank you very much, Ria. And if you and Annabelle could maybe type the answer to these questions in the Q&A feature, because I see they keep coming, which is wonderful. But I do want to take us from the resilience and the dry land deep into the ocean, get us all wet, and turn to Mamuko from the World Maritime University and Rizky from UN Global Pulse. And we'll start with Mamuka to talk about decarbonization through behavioral science, and then Rizky, the floor will be yours to talk about relocation consideration in response to sea level rise. So Mamuko, please.
So, hello everyone. My name is Momoko Kitada. I'm the professor and also the head of maritime education and training at the World Maritime University. So yeah, this is the time that we will talk about a little bit of maritime and ocean sectors and the application of this behavioral science. Just very quickly, it's a UN established higher education only we are doing the postgraduate education. We have a lot of alumni all around the world. Our focus is the developing countries. And so we want to talk about from this literature that this is the base. And we are just trying to understand that how we are overseeing this kind of decarbonization as a transition, but how those kind of transition can actually happening and creating even a social transformations, including the people, and also changing their behaviors and their attitudes about that how the transition can also be benefiting for the societies. And then I'm not going through so much, but transition is a very interesting term because it's actually include a lot of behavioral, cognitive, and the change of the perceptions and also negotiation, solving, and so all these things. I don't have time to talk about it right now, but then this is a very interesting concept. So what we just started with what is really a transition means. And then in the maritime sector, there is a more like a bottom-up approach that this Maritime Just Transition Task Force was formed during the COP26 in Glasgow. And then there is a number of projects. They focusing on two things. Basically, one is a decarbonization, and the second is a kind of equity and diversity. We are also WME is part of those various different projects. Now I would like to move on to the different kind of case studies, which is like kind of helping us to think about what kind of transition that we talked about. And I'm going to use some case studies from the Pacific. Again, this is a little bit old book, but this is also based on some research that we have done. The context is that we are not always, that there are many different kind of contexts that we can talk about the decarbonization. This time, I would like to really bring the almost like a farthest place to consider this kind of people-centered clean energy transition with a number of challenges that you can see on the slide. Although they have, really the small island developing states are surrounded by all the natures and oceans, so there is a plenty of natural resources. However, they are also quite vulnerable, and resilience is also another issue. So in here that I would like to highlight that some of those challenges with the fossil fuels, that especially that the Pacific women are very much affected, and they are not the primary users of the fuels. And this is also another slide that this is a case of the Solomon Islands, but the people are actually quite not much up to this decarbonization transitions. Just recently, we had at the bottom of the slide that you can see that this solar-powered vessels, which is now operating the several Pacific Island states, which is also kind of a good example. But basically, that there is a number of challenges, and then it is often forgotten that the women are also the users of those marine fuels. The last example that I would like to share is that this is also that how the women's entrepreneurship is hindered by the maritime shipping operations or practices or some legal barriers, because even some women wants to start up some kind of business to contribute in the circular economy, kind of shipping the used batteries to the other recycling facilities, which is not in the islands, but some other continents. There is some challenges of the shipping practices, legal issues, and also the local people are not really recognizing that the batteries as recyclable goods. So there is a lot of behavioral change is required in order to enabling this kind of business case and circular economy and women's empowerment and entrepreneurship. So I just wanted to share some of those case studies from the WMU research. So as a summary, I would like to highlight that the people-centered clean energy transitions requires that the placing the people in the picture of the maritime decarbonization, because it is often that the technology is focused and then the people's part is often forgotten. and behavioral change and social transformations through the transition that we have to really emphasize. And a reminder of the women also as the users of the marine fuels. It is not only men, because there is a different kind of access issues, which I cannot really talk about in this short time, but there are many issues. Empowerment of women and entrepreneurship is also a challenge in this context, but we should, of course, encourage more circular economy, change of the behaviors, and also we need the educations as a kind of tools to changing their behavior and mindset. And this is also where I am, head of maritime education and training at the World Maritime University, to try to contribute to this area. So thank you very much, and sorry for the very rushed presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Momoko, and such a strong message there about putting humans in the center. Moving to Risky from UN Global Pulse. Floor is yours, Risky. And Momoko, if you want to address some of the questions in the meantime in the chat, please feel free to do so in writing.
So can you see my screen? Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Risky Ashvina. I'm a social systems research associate at UN Global Pulse Asia Pacific. We are the Secretary General's Innovation Lab. We work at the intersections of innovation, human sciences, and we work across a network that includes Helsinki, Kampala, New York, and Jakarta. So today I'm going to be presenting about behavioral biases behind communities' decision to their relocation choices. So sea level rise, as we all know, is a ubiquitous issues across the world, including here in Indonesia. There have been a lot of projections from multiple sources suggesting that millions of people would be affected and Indonesia will experience severe socioeconomic impacts. So in response to the situation, there are like several adaptation strategies, as you can see on the screen, but like the most prominent one is planned relocations where coastal communities move to several places. However, like when it comes to relocation, this is actually a difficult reality of poor coastal communities, and many are often not willing to relocate. And this is actually what prompts us to further understand what actually motivates their decision. So right now, this is the chart of how we're getting started to do a BeSci project. So at UNGP, we're now exploring how behavioral science can be leveraged to see this issue and how it can actually help us come up with solutions that put community at the center by understanding their behaviors and perspectives. So these are actually our methods. We did some literature review, media monitoring, and then we did some archetypes based on the thematic mapping and analysis and ecosystem mapping. So based on our initial review of literature and multiple sources, we have identified various biases that influence people against relocating, and we'll be exploring some of them. So we found that, as you can see on the screen, they generally fall under four main archetypes. The denier, the guardian, the skeptic, and the realist, and we will explore each of these groups and their individual biases in views of relocation. So the first one is the denier. So communities who fall under this group, they don't believe that sea level rise is happening, and there are like some biases, underlying biases behind their choice. So the first one is they have the motivated reasoning. So they already have their beliefs that things are okay in their neighborhood. They're already there for a long time. Flood happens, but then they will go away. And even though that there are information around them telling them about sea level rise is happening, it's going to be severe in the future, they won't appreciate objective evidence. So they are unlikely to move. So second, also they have optimism bias because they have yet to notice the effects of sea level rise. They overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes. So they will assume that this current situation will continue and they will remain safe. Third, they also have projection bias. So they assume their beliefs will remain consistent and the threat of sea level rise will remain constant and not increase in severity in the future. So if they don't need to move right now, they won't need to in the future. The second is the guardian archetype, which is prominently found in indigenous communities. So under this group, they know that sea level rise is happening, but they resist to relocate because they have a desire to preserve their culture. So they have several biases behind their choice. One is social affinity because so they live in a tight-knit communities. They have the shared ideals that they have to respect and protect their land and cultural heritage. And second is loss aversion. So they don't want to abandon or give up their ancestral land or community that has been protected and nurtured for generations. The last one is they have this injunctive norm. So the ideals of their communities are often centered around loyalty and commitment. So relocation may not be aligned with their communal values, and if they relocate, their community may not approve it. The next one is the skeptic. So the skeptic archetype. So the skeptic archetype, people who fall under this group, they know that the sea level rise is happening, but then they do not want to relocate because they are skeptical against government's relocation proposal. And they have some biases as well that motivate their choice. One is representativeness heuristic. So people judge the likelihood of an outcome based on their mental stereotypes. So skeptics believe that government initiatives often fail, so sea level rise relocation won't be any different. Second is confirmation bias. So people filter for only evidence that confirms their existing beliefs. So because they already view the government negatively, they are likely to reject any positive reasoning in favor of relocation. And the last one is availability heuristic. So people make judgments on what quickly comes to mind. So often these people recall negative stories regarding government efforts, or maybe even their own recollections of previous schemes that failed. The next one is the realist. So finally, we have the realist, the only archetype that is open to relocating. So they have seen and understood the effects of sea level rise, so they decide to relocate. They believe that it's better to take action, even though like things are not certain in the future. There are like some biases behind their decisions. One is action bias. So it's basically telling that our tendency to favor action over inaction. So we feel compelled to do something. So for the realist, it's just better to relocate than stay. Second is the regret aversion. So they know that sea level rise is happening and it may become worse in the future. So for them, it's just better move. They don't want to regret like not moving when they actually had the opportunity. And the last one is social norms, because people like to follow what they see others do. So they see their neighbors also moving, and it gives them reassurance that moving is the right decision as others are doing it. However, it's also worth noting, often we think that, oh, that the lack of awareness is what tends to cause resistance. However, as like we've seen on the previous slides, we explored how both the guardian and the skeptic are very aware of the effects of sea level rise. They're up there in the chart, but still they choose to stay. But we also have to remember beyond the archetypes that people, individual, they don't make decisions in a vacuum. So it is also worth noting that their decision to relocation goes beyond their biases and behaviors. We should also take into account external factors from the environment. So for example, we can see like the economic environment, the way that government provide incentive for communities to relocate, or physical infrastructures, like what kind of places are new for communities to relocate to better places. So those are some examples. So this archetype is just basically our first explorations of how behavioral science can help us identify behavioral barriers and how we can put community at the center in our solution design for our sea level rise portfolio. So we hope that by using this forum as an avenue to receive feedback for our next steps that we have planned. So this includes fieldwork, so to test our understanding and our hypothesis, and also like community dialogue, where we engage with coastal communities to understand better their lived experiences, their views, and barriers or views against relocations. So these are just some questions that can help us guide the Q&A sessions. Also check out our blogs about the sea level rise. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Risky. And many questions in the chat for you and Momoko, and I see Momoko is already typing answers, but maybe just to take a quick one, if you can just explain in a few seconds, how were the profiles established? So did you conduct interviews, and how did you assess the biases? Question for Guya.
Okay, is it for me? Is it
For you, yes, from Guya. Yeah.
Hardest profile established. So right now at UNGP, we're trying to explore the potentials of using behavioral science. So we're just if you look at the previous slides, with the chart from UN guide to to get started with the behavioral science. So we're in the phase where we're trying to understand first the community. So we did a lot of literature review, media monitoring, understanding the stories of impacted communities. So we haven't done the field work yet. So we use this forum to kind of like get the feedback of our hypothesis and understanding of the profiles. And then like after getting the feedback, we're going to test our understanding to the field. So whether like these archetypes are like sufficient, or like probably there are more archetypes that we probably overlook in the process. So basically it's just kind of like we do our homework before we go to the field. And also after that, we do the thematic, so based on the stories, so we also did some thematic analysis and mapping so that we can come up with 4 archetypes so far. So there are like several frameworks, like the way they view the sea level rise, the way they perceive information, other factors that influence their decisions, for example, like cultures or economic incentives and other things that were mentioned previously in the slides. I hope that answers.
Fantastic, thank you. And asking again, given the interest of time, our panelists to look for questions addressed to them in the Q&A and then answer them directly. So we will remain with UN Global Pulse, but after we cover the earth and water, we're gonna move to the fire, to the creativity. My favorite topic. How do we cultivate really a sense of emotions and strong sense of creativity in our future ready UN? And remaining with UN Global Pulse, but moving the conversation to Lauren Porter to talk about how to seed creative cultures towards UN 2.0. So Lauren, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm assuming you can see my screen. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Prater. I am the Creative Strategy Lead at Global Pulse. As my colleague Kiki already mentioned, we're the Secretary General's Innovation Lab, and Global Pulse supports responsible and inclusive innovation across the UN system. We collaborate with partners on new solutions and support the UN family in its transformation. So, I'm kicking off this presentation with this powerful statement from the UN 2.0 policy brief, as it really sets the stage for why I'm here today. The transformation we seek as the UN isn't just about technology. It's about people, mindsets, and culture. And that's exactly where this work begins for my team and me. Last year, UN Global Pulse launched the most creative look to the future, imagination and creative practice in service of organizational transformation. The report explores how embracing creative practice can catalyze innovation and transformation across the UN system. And it's really grounded in the vision articulated in our common agenda that in order to meet the challenges of the 21st century, the UN must combine the best of our past achievements with the most creative look to the future. That's where the title comes from. And the paper offers learning and recommendations from a range of experts that argue that creative practice can help our organizations embrace uncertainty and complexity. It can help us engage in new, longer timelines and inclusive alternatives. It can create a bridge between ways of knowing and between different generations, and help us practice and build new infrastructures for the future. And what follows in the report is also this sort of set of recommendations and starting points that assist UN colleagues and practitioners to experiment with integrating art, imagination, and creative practice in their day-to-day work. This includes things such as, testing your team or organization's readiness for change, establishing champions, rethinking competencies. We talk about evaluating differently and some detailed ideas for pilots. And it also comes with this workbook, which is on the right. And through this process, we collaborate with a diverse group of UN colleagues, researchers, practitioners, and artists to sort of explore and identify the behaviors required to creatively transform the UN system. And the research and conversations shape the development of our creative competency model, showed here, which explores the attitudes and behaviors required to practice creativity in a way that leads to innovation and impact. And beyond this initial diagram that you see here, there's also a second part of this model that outlines concrete examples, suggestions to start putting these behaviors into action through projects, or in your teams. However, this research was always meant to be intended to be put into practice and help experimentation within our own team at Global Pulse, and to inform a broader suite of sort of future creative programming to help imagine new possibilities. And at Global Pulse, we've been channeling this research into a project focusing on the intersection of participatory innovation, storytelling, and creative methods. We've developed workshop curriculums and collaborated with UN teams in Brazil and Mexico to design interventions and capacity building opportunities so they can have sort of these tools, methods, and mindsets for practicing new behaviors and sort of, manifesting the sort of future organization that we want. Through this project, we also recently created a card deck that is also here on the screen, where you find prompts for reflection, experimentation, and creative expression that were also derived directly from the creative competency model. And I'll share the link for that. And yeah, we're not here just trying to make these research recommendations. We're really trying to live them. And this is through new kinds of gatherings. We've been also actively rehearsing alternative ways of being, working, and collaborating with partners within Global Pulse as well. And a great example we're building on this year is the Department of the Possible, which is a sort of fictional department and safe space created with the UN Innovation Network and Beyond Lab, who will speak after me. And it really invites participants to experiment with transformative approaches, cultivating this culture of openness and shared curiosity for new ways of working. Yeah, we're still learning and testing this work within our own team, recognizing that behavioral and cultural change takes time and much is required to measure the impact of that work. But we remain committed to this journey, convinced it's essential for building a UN 2.0. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And I see already a couple of questions for you in the Q&A, but I'm moving really quick to Edward from the Beyond Lab in Geneva to talk about the science of emotions.
Thank you so much, Iliad, and I hope you can all see my screen. Yes, I'm Edward. I'm with the Beyond Lab at UN Geneva, and we're a social innovation space that's focused on long-term sustainability. I just also want to thank Mary for organizing this session and for inviting us to participate. So yeah, I'm going to briefly, also being cognizant of time, just give a little bit of a showcase of our HOPE project, and just like a little note that we're still at a very relatively early stage compared to, I think, a lot of the other ideas and projects that were shared so far in this session. So before I go into talking really about what the HOPE project is, and my screen is just frozen, just one second. Okay, why HOPE? I've put these images here because this kind of led us to go into this HOPE space, and also emotions and understanding the role of emotions in sustainability. Probably about a year and a half ago, we were wondering, looking at all of the different activism and activist movements that were happening globally, that there was a lot of anger, and rightfully so, and emotions that were coming through. And in often cases, they weren't emotions on positivity, but ones of fear and using shame, negativity, and whatnot. So we thought, what about understanding the role of positivity and positive emotions in the sustainability landscape? And could that actually help us shift the needle on advancing not only the SDGs, but long-term sustainability going forward? So that kind of led us to this exploration, and being a lab, that's something that we have in our DNA. And I just want to focus my presentation really on showing a little bit in terms of how we got involved, and then just touching upon some of the points of where we are with the HOPE project. So why we started, I think a lot of the focus in behavioral science and BeSci, of course, is looking at how people act. But it seems that there's little less in terms of how or like why people act, and looking at the emotions level. And that's something that we wanted to understand more. Second, that climate, and rightfully so, often dominates the behavioral science or the affective science psychology agenda, but there's often not a lot of consideration of the broader sustainability agenda. That's something that we were keen to explore more. And with these two together, it was quite clear that this could be a really unique opportunity for us to engage on this topic. So how did we start? Well, we were invited by a journal called Emotion Review to actually assess this topic from a commentary perspective and share what we think could be the missing link to seeing more activism and action on sustainability. And that would be through emotions and understanding them more. That led us to hold a high-level multi-stakeholder event at UN Geneva at the end of 23, where we had practitioners, psychologists come and really unpack emotions and what kind of emotions will actually activate people. And that actually led us to this focus on hope as being kind of the anchor emotion to drive people into action. And to do that, we've been partnering with an academic institute in Geneva to kickstart this research on hope and to really infuse it, though, from a multilateral perspective. And that's something that we were hearing from different academics, is that they have all this research and knowledge, but they don't know how to get it out into the hands of practitioners and then ultimately in the hands of policymakers. So what is the HOPE Project? In a real nutshell, the HOPE Project aims to harness the power of hope and other emotions to drive positive and collective action for long-term sustainability. And why did I say other emotions? Because we see the kind of emotion scale as being like a Swiss Army knife, that of course positive emotions do have a positive benefit on well-being and health and action, but you also need those moments of anger, of fear, of despair to actually give this combination and to make it more effective in the long term. And our HOPE project, we have two pathways that we're developing. One is the method and one is what we're calling the House of Hope. So on the method, this is what we're developing with the University of Geneva. They have a Swiss Center for Affective Sciences, and some of you may know Dr. Tobias Brosch. He's been, I guess, at previous BeSci weeks, and he's working with us and some of his team members on the method itself. But the method is a behavioral and mediation framework that will leverage constructive hope to drive collective action and resilience through positive visions of the future and sustainability. And these are the different pillars. I won't really go into it, but there's the hope model itself that really looks at the different stages of hope and other emotions. We're also going to be looking at having the method in terms of tools and resources that practitioners can use to implement and bring hope and positive emotions into their work. And of course, things like learning, communications, and outreach and engagement are equally important and part of the method itself. The House of Hope, this is still very much conceptual. We don't have a concrete way forward in terms of a partner yet to help us realize this, but the idea is really to have a convening space or a place for hope to live. And we see this as a multi-stakeholder, intergenerational space that is both virtual and physical. And why is this important? Because we think we also need to have this convening for hope to move us outside of the traditional hierarchies and venues to have more inclusive collaboration. And then also for the HOPE method itself to help foster dialogue and to be used in, for instance, from visioning exercises to actually negotiations or actually to policy huddles at the member state level. And the House of Hope itself should be something that is inspiring. So using spatial psychology and design to really elevate an experience that brings a kind of human presence online and on par with the emotional level, and ultimately to inspire action. So I've been very, very, very brief here. And I want to end this on a hopeful note, no pun intended. So next Tuesday, if you're really interested in knowing more about the project and to get a deep dive into the HOPE method itself, my colleague Amani is going to be holding a community and partners event on Tuesday. I'll put it in the detail in the chat, and you'll be able to learn more about our HOPE method. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Edward, and thank you so much, Lauren, for this super positive note of ending the Expo session for today. I want to remind everyone who could join us that there are plenty of resources in the chat. And for our panelists. If there are questions addressed to you in the Q&A, please address them in writing, since our time is unfortunately up. So I will take us back to you, Mary, to close this.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't know if I need to really close this myself. Thank you so much for this session. Lots of different backgrounds and context here. So yeah, thank you, Edward and Lauren. There's some questions about how to work with creatives, how do behaviors and emotions coming together. So if you have any links here, Edward, if you want to put in the chat, that would be great. Yeah, great. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you hopefully at some of the Behavioral Science Week sessions over the course of the week. Thanks, everyone.